Hey Farai, welcome to the show. I'm so happy to have you. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Thanks so much, Mbali. Thank you for having me on the show. I'm excited for us to chat. I'm excited to also just share and also learn from you as well.
Yeah, totally. So where are you? Where are you sitting at the moment?
So I am currently at home in our little home office based here in Johannesburg, SA.
Okay, that's cool. And I'm just wondering, I always generally ask people, to break the ice, what have you been running from to honor us with your time?
What have I been running from? I must say it's been a very busy morning. A lot of back-to-backs that have been scheduled. And I was like, no, we definitely need to have this session today. I think I've been looking forward to us recording and having a session. And so, yeah, I think a lot on the go, but I think that there are definitely so many nuggets of value that come up, just like this podcast, that I just had to make sure that I'm a part of.
Oh, I'm so glad that you made time for us in your busy schedule. So I have this question that I ask everybody. It's a bit of a tradition is what is your adapt story, right? And you have free reign on where that starts. Basically, what is that turning point for you where you felt like you adapted to a change in your life or an unexpected occurrence that sort of, yeah, molded the trajectory that you're on. And I think it's just adapting for me is very different from adjusting because when you adjust, there's a change, you adjust and you flow again with whatever's flowing. But I feel like adapting is so much more dynamic. It's people who adjust, but then again, form their own path in a way. So yeah, what's your adapt story?
Really, really love the question. And I think for me, and it's actually a reflection I had a bit earlier this week on that I shared on social media. For me, I recognized and finally listened in my early 20s to what I believe is my calling, my purpose on earth, why God has put me here, and that is to serve unemployed young Africans. And by serving,
Mm,
that means coming up with critical, sustainable solutions to curb the unemployment crisis that we face across the country, to create sustainable learning to earning pathways for young Africans, and especially for African women, who we know and data shows us are the most disadvantaged when it comes to both employment and entrepreneurship opportunities. So when look and think about my adapt story, I think about the fact that, I went to uni, I went to Stellenbosch University, I studied financial accounting, was very set that I'd work for one of the big four firms. Very early into my first year, I then realized, oh my word, there's so many other courses I could do. But naturally,
mhm.
having a Zimbabwean father and and a South African mother, they were like, no way, you're going to stick to accounting. So I completed my accounting degree, but got very involved on campus in leadership and service. And when it was time for my honors, I managed to get in for my financial accounting honors. And I had to have a very honest conversation with my parents to say, Mom and Dad, we are people who can't wait to be CAs, who are failing honors. Imagine me that goes into honors just to do it for you guys and not because it's something that I see myself doing. And
Mhm.
so we reached an agreement and I switched to management accounting honors, which I loved. I mean, learning about risk and strategy is right up my alley. And ended up working for one of the big fours. I worked for Deloitte. And while I was working for Deloitte, I think that's when that need to adapt came up again, where I was like, I have to find my purpose elsewhere. I think there are
Mm,
those who work for, big auditing firms are great and they've got their purpose there, but that wasn't for me. And so I applied to do my master's. I thought, if I want to find my purpose in a service role, I need to educate myself further. So I applied for my master's across different universities. I really wanted a UK based experience. I managed to get in to King's College London. Again, I had to push so that I can be at KCL. So that wasn't an easy journey either. but managed to get in to do my master's in the political economy of emerging markets and managed to get funding from the First Rand Foundation, who afforded me an incredible scholarship, and went to the UK surrounded by a class of over 100 of us from 50 different countries. And that was like this beautiful aha moment, like the world has got so much to offer.
Mm.
And what I think was an incredible moment of adapting, this turning point where it was like, this knock, 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 Farai, here is your calling, is that in that class, there were people that worked for government, for NGOs, for development institutions. And I hadn't had that exposure in SA. And once I could see what my peers were doing in their respective countries, I thought, I have to go back home and I want to serve. And let me actually look at what the NGO space has to offer. And I got my previous English teacher from high school, also my debating teacher, shared with me that her husband runs a great, well-known healthcare NGO and would love for me to come in and interview. And I hadn't heard of the Aurum Institute, but went for the interviews, started working there after some time of being back in SA, initially not being employed, then doing some internships, and then managed to start working at the Aurum Institute, which was so incredible. And working at the intersection of healthcare and youth unemployment was just really further emphasis of what my calling is on earth. And I feel like it was God's way of just opening doors for me to be able to make an impact. And since then, I've been so consistent in just following that journey to say, whatever opportunities come that allow me to serve young people, that allow me to have a seat at the table where we discuss critical and sustainable solutions for solving youth unemployment crises, that's the space that I need to be in. So, that in a summary is my adapt story.
No, that's really incredible. And I mean, I think it's super interesting what you say about, that aha moment that you had surrounded by people from different disciplines. And you realize that, okay, like I can actually do something about this beyond the bubble of South Africa. And I'm just so it's actually surprising that we've never met because I did my master's at Stellenbosch as well.
Oh, amazing.
But before I did my master's, I did a postgrad diploma at the Sustainability Institute, and they have a similar approach. So I think that was actually where I had my aha moment is in a class full of people who were from different disciplines. And because it was an international course, but in South Africa, that for me was also super interesting. Government representatives, private sector, like engineers together with people from the social sector. Like it was just super interesting. And so I can definitely relate to that. And I'm just wondering, how did the TED talk that you gave, how did that, like, in which part of the story did that come in? Because I found that as maybe not necessarily your adapt story or your adapting point, but like a significant point in that journey, would you say?
Yeah, and sure. Thank you so much for reminding me of that. It feels like it was centuries ago. And so
2018 is a long time ago,
2018.
yes.
So in university, um, I started an organization called the Africa Matters Initiative, which I'm very excited is still running today. And the co-founder, Rianne, is the CEO of that organization and doing some fantastic work. And the reason I started Africa Matters is because so dad is from Zim, mom is South African. So I am
Hmm.
what I love to call an African hybrid. And in being an African hybrid growing up in South Africa, I've always felt like I'm not South African enough and I'm not seen
Mm,
as being Zimbabwean enough. So
yes.
where on earth do I fit? And what's been interesting as well is that, I've grappled with issues of identity and recognizing who I am. I'm now so content in being this African hybrid and navigating spaces. And now I'm like, I can enter a space and be Zimbabwean, I can enter a space and be South African. And
Mhm.
that's how I then love to be received, to just reap the perks of having this diversity.
Yes.
More than that, when we had the Afrophobic attacks in South Africa, what really stood out to me, and we've had a series of them, and I'm not saying it's xenophobic because it's not, it's Afrophobic.
I noted.
It's so important that we recognize that there is this ill treatment towards Black Africans. Um, and when we had those attacks in country, a lot of people who were in support of these attacks were justifying it by saying, no, but Zimbabweans, Nigerians are taking our jobs, bringing drugs into the country, whatever the theories were, not recognizing that there's fundamental issues in that thinking and in that logic. And that Africa did not have borders historically, these borders were created. And that showed me that
Mhm.
there's so much that we as Africans don't know about Africa. And as a result, we then turn to hating one another instead of understanding each other and leveraging each other's strengths. Another key motivation for starting Africa Matters was that the way the Western media reports on what happens on the continent is very different to how reports happen of what happened in the West. So, for example, we had the Jesui Charlie attacks in
Mhm.
Jan 2015, if I'm not mistaken. You didn't see pictures of dead human bodies in any of the marketing or in any of of the reporting or storytelling. A few months later, in April of the same year, we also had once again terrorist attacks at Garissa University in Kenya. And the reporting there, you saw bodies of dead Black Africans. Why do you need to be convinced of an attack that occurs with Africans by seeing pictures of us displayed that don't honor us? Whereas when we report for what happens in the global north, you don't see those same sorts of images circulating. So the
Yeah.
discrepancies in how we report and honor Africans is so different. So is the narratives around Africans. Today, there still exist narratives that that Africa is the dark continent, that Africans are not educated, um, that Africans are not trustworthy. And when I hear and still see those narratives, I'm like, where do you guys stay? Just come to the continent and see that that is all false. And so all of these
Yeah.
reasons were what really planted a seed in my mind to say we need an organization that's going to, one, really dispel these negative African narratives by reclaiming the narrative. Two, that's going to educate Africans about Africa. And
Mhm.
three, that's going to maximize this youth boom that we've got. I mean, Africa's got the largest youth population in the world. We continue to grow year in and year out. Young people hustle, young people work, young people can be educated. There's just an economic opportunity in this youth boom. How do we upskill this youth boom so that they've got the right skills and knowledge to be able to lead the communities that they come from? So I
Yeah.
started Africa Matters from there, approached Rianne, the co-founder, built up a really great team. And since then, it's been amazing to see what the organization has been able to achieve. And when I did the TED Talk, I was referring to um, a slogan, a driver that we use at Africa Matters, one that we've heard from different parts of the world that says we are the ones we've been waiting for. And the
Yes.
goal of the talk was to encourage people to say, you don't have to wait to see a change within the community that you come from. When I started Africa Matters, there was no funding. It was just an idea. There were many people who did not buy into the concept, but it was about just starting something. Because a lot of the times we think that if we want to make an impact, we need to wait for funding if it's an NGO or if it's in
Mhm.
corporate. We need to be a certain age in our lives for us to make the impact. But impact starts with you wherever you are, however old you are. Don't let those barriers stop you. You just have to start somewhere. So that talk really catapulted the organization. It really catapulted me as well as an individual. And I'm grateful because who would have thought that I'd be doing a talk in Germany about the power of young Africans and why we are the ones we've been waiting for.
Yeah, well, no, I absolutely love everything you said. And it's such a, it's so loaded because there are so many topics. I actually don't know where to start. But I really must say that everything that you have said echoes the sentiment that I had with this podcast, just knowing the fact that in my personal and also my work network, I know so many incredible people, and yet I just found that the narrative was lacking that, So it was almost like there are so many examples of people who are doing really great things in different parts of the world, that are either connected to Africa or have some tie to Africa. And I think that it's just, yeah, it was rather surprising to me in my daily life and my work life, just in general, especially being an expat here in Germany, realizing that the narrative hasn't shifted as much as I expected it to. And mainly because, like you say, the platforms that are telling the stories and the media are just covering it from their own perspective.
Mm.
And maybe it is then stories like yours that I appreciate so much because it's directly linked to what's really happening in Africa past this dead narrative of, being victims and being colonized and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it really, really resonates with me. And actually with your TED Talk and also connected to the slogan that you were talking about, I really loved one of the t-shirts I saw at the back. It said, "Stopped waiting." I think for me, that was like, really, really cool to see. And I'm just wondering, like you said, your journey back then as an undergraduate and here you are now,
Mhm.
since
Mm.
2018. Are there any lessons that you feel have shifted the way that you see things based on just experience, dictations versus reality? Are there any misconceptions that you feel like you had about going into this journey with the Africa Matters initiative?
Mm. Sure. Really appreciate the question. And you're right. I think it's looking back. So 6 years later, what is it that I've learned? And I think that when I started on the journey of wanting to make impact, I think one of the misperceptions that I had, and I think I'll perhaps maybe look at three lessons, but I guess to start with the first one is that so one of the misperceptions I had was that everyone is in the impact space because it's the right thing to do. And
Okay.
that, my friends, is a very naive thought to have. And I realized that not everyone is in the impact space or in the NGO space because it is the right thing to do. The NGO space is a very lucrative space to be in. And
Hmm.
so some people are driven just by finances, some people are driven by power. Then you've got those who are driven to serve. And I think that I love to see that there are more of those who are driven by service than those who are driven by money, power, or whatever they're there for. But often, those who are driven by money and power are those who are at the top of these various organizations.
True.
And so I think that was an important lesson to learn, which is
Hmm.
that when you're in the sector, you have to be aware of what the intentions are from colleagues, from donors, from leadership, and you have to be clear about what your intention is within the sector and what matters for you. What does impact look like for you? And I'm grateful because, having left Africa Matters, there's so many different experiences that I've had. I worked for the Aurum Institute. We then founded from the Aurum Institute Youth Health Africa, which in essence looks at upskilling unemployed youth so that they could fill the gaps in the healthcare workforce. Then was recruited to work for the Youth Employment Service, where I could really scale up what great youth placements look like for quality work experience. What are skills that youth need to be employable? And I
Mhm.
managed different implementation partners there, built out a great team, managed a team called Youth Stream that looks at engaging with young people and supporting them while they're gaining work experience, and then started serving as as Chief Partnerships Officer, managing all of our external relationships. Was then recruited to Accenture, which is where I currently work, to head up the Africa Livelihoods and Education portfolio for Accenture Development Partnerships. So, in essence, any projects that we've got with clients that look at employment, entrepreneurship, or education on the continent, I'm really grateful that I'll be involved in. And in these journeys, my experience has grown from just focusing on South Africa to now focusing on beyond SA, looking at,
Mm.
youth in Nigeria, in Kenya, Cote d'Ivoire, Burundi, the Philippines, etc. And so I think what's made it possible for me and how I've navigated through this space is learning quickly about what my drivers are, recognizing that there's different characters within the sector. And like I said, everyone has their own objectives for being there. It was naive for me to think initially that everyone's here because we all want to kumbaya. And that did make it difficult at times, and there's many battles fought in the name of justice in my journey and experience. And so I'd say that was a really important lesson, and one that younger Farai was not aware of and had to grow up quickly to ensure that we do serve the people that we set out to serve and we do it in the right way. The second big lesson that I learned was that your values are so important. My husband loves to say, when he meets someone who doesn't have values, he loves to say, oh my word, that person was a shapeless amoeba. And I
Okay.
just laugh so much to be like, if you don't have values,
Does
wherever
your
the
husband
wind,
happen to be Nigerian? It sounds like one of those Nigerian proverbs.
it does sound super sassy. He is Zulu, but
Okay.
definitely I think a lot of the influences are the things that he watches. And I think
Okay.
if you don't have values, wherever the wind sways, you sway. And what you have to have as you set out on your journey of impact or whatever it is that you want to do in life, it's to recognize what are values, what is important to you. For me, it is navigating with purpose, it is having compassion, it is always driving impact, it's walking with integrity, it is being kind. I think kindness is so underrated. It is showing grace. It's learning to trust within a team. It's leaving my ego at the door insofar as I can. And it's understanding that even with myself, I may not always get it right. And how do I afford myself that grace? And so having values is really, really key. And I
Mhm.
think that if I think of me when I started my journey, I was a bit soft, and I am quite soft as a person. I think I've always been someone that's just been a bit softer, but I've had to grow up and be quite firm when the timing is right to say, nope, I don't agree with this because of X, Y, and Z. And so I've
Mm.
had to then hold true to my values. And it's difficult at times when you're holding on to your values with people that are older than you, people that are senior to you. But it's so important that you hold on to those because it becomes difficult to sleep at night if you don't. And so your values are so critical in whatever space that you navigate to. I'd say the third lesson that I've learned in this space is that when you're working in the care economy, and the reason I say youth unemployment or development would be the care economy is because you are serving, you are caring for others. You're working in such an economy or industry because of the fact that you are serving people. There is often, if not always, an element of guilt to say, I have to overwork, I have to do X, Y, and Z, because if I don't, young people at the end of the day will be negatively affected. And while that guilt comes from a place of wanting to serve and to do right by the communities that you're working with, it is so unhealthy because those same people in the care economy are those most likely to burn out year in and year out. And that's been
Mhm.
my own experience. When I was working at Yes, I got COVID 3 times. And it's because of the fact that I was so attached to, if I don't do this, this is the implication on young people, rather than, realistically, can you do this task tomorrow? If you can, leave it for tomorrow or leave it for next week. But burning yourself out is not helpful. And so self care is so important. And a lot of people
Mm.
still have the perception that self care is selfish. But what I've learned in my experience is that you have to practice self care if you want to be selfless to others. It sounds so cliche, but you cannot pour from an empty cup. And so,
Yeah.
if this means that you set your boundaries, then you have to set your boundaries. I'm becoming better at boundaries. I'm not amazing at it, but my rule of thumb is I'll open my laptop at this time every day, I'll close it at this time every day. On weekends, I don't work because on weekends I need to recharge so that in the week I can give of my best to those around me.
Yeah.
Um, Take your leave days and don't feel like you owe your employer for taking your leave days. You don't even have to give a reason why you're taking leave. Just take your leave days because it's so important for you. So I'd say those are really important lessons, ones that I'm still learning time and time again, but that's been key for me in this journey.
Yeah, no, thanks so much for sharing that. And also, I'm just from the stories that you told, you've basically moved from the NGO space or the care industry, like you said, to the private sector. And one of the things that I feel like when I left the Sustainability Institute, I felt pretty overwhelmed
Mhm,
by the complexity of the world in general. And also, I mean, we looked at also very big topics like what you mentioned, youth unemployment, poverty. These are such big challenges. They're wicked problems or complex problems, like they're defined in academia. And one of the things that I was always a bit cautious of was the NGO space. I don't know why so much, but I think it's because in that sustainability course, we watched so many different documentaries about the NGO space and how it's basically like a consulting opportunity for people. And it's become something that it doesn't really focus on impact, but actually about writing applications for grant funding and ticking boxes for donors, etc. So I think in a way that was a bit of my bias. And I acknowledge that I think I still have that bias. And it's something that, yeah, that I would like to really get to the bottom of and try and understand what do you think is a good I wouldn't say good, there's no good or bad, but what is from your experience a model that you think is a better fit? You can give, it can be a contextual example that you give, but do you think social entrepreneurship is the solution, this hybrid between profit and impact? Or do you think that NGOs still have their space and their role, and this complete dependence on donor funding is necessary and needed? What is your view on that? And also, please challenge any of am I actually asking to be educated?
yeah, yeah, and I think that's, the question you've asked is once again really, really key. So the ideal system and what we need for systems change is your different role players who have got their roles and places within society. So you
Hmm.
do need your NGOs, and I'll touch on why. You need your social entrepreneurs, you need government, you need the private sector. You
Hmm.
need your religious organizations, you need civil society orgs. All of these ecosystem partners play very key roles to bring about any sort of systems change that we'd like to see. And so if I can give you a practical example, which is if we look at the youth employment ecosystem here in South Africa, it's no secret that South Africa has got the world's worst youth employment rate. And we are in the midst of a youth unemployment crisis. And we find ourselves here because of numerous factors. There is the legacy of apartheid, there is economic growth and job growth, there is the skills mismatch between skills youth have, what the private sector wants, there are information asymmetries,
Mhm.
there's issues like access to networks. There's so many different reasons as to why we've got the youth unemployment crisis on our hands. For us to bring about systems change to solve the crisis, each of the ecosystem partners have to play a role. If we look at the structure we've got now, we have got what's called the Presidential Youth Employment Intervention, which was launched a few years ago by President Ramaphosa, which is basically this coordinated effort to address youth unemployment through collaboration between ecosystem players that focus on creating sustainable pathways for youth across various sectors and looking at how do we enable the township economy? How do we create demand-led skilling opportunities? How do we give youth workplace-based experience, etc.?
Mhm.
And since the PYEI was formed, there are different members who focus on different pillars of this presidential youth employment intervention. And so one of the overarching layers is what we call the National Pathway Management Network, which is in essence, it shows up in the form of a platform called SA Youth. SA Youth is a free, zero-rated platform that is run by Harambee and the presidency, and in essence gives corporates, NGOs, any orgs really, free access to recruit unemployed youth. It's also free for young people themselves. That has
Okay.
been a phenomenal tool because we've now got, if I'm not mistaken, 4.4 million young people on the platform and more companies signing up each day to recruit young people through a platform. That's revolutionized recruitment and made it so much easier because historically, the journey of finding employment for young people was such a stressful one. You have to go
Mhm.
onto LinkedIn, you have to go onto PNet, you have to go onto this platform. SA Youth aggregates these opportunities. If we look at then who's doing what within the sector, you have got government who are running the PYEI, who have also got their public employment programs, which is an important aspect to have in our society as well, and who are creating opportunities for young people to meet employers. You've got your private sector who are, because of the PYEI, sharing on open forums with government to say, these are the skills that we need for our workforce over the next 5 years. Let's ensure that the skilling opportunities we give young people at matric level, in TVETs, in universities, is aligned with what market needs are. Then we
Mhm.
will employ them. The private sector is also employing young people and providing funding to NGOs to train up young people as well. You've then got your NGO partners who do so much incredible work. I've got so much respect for NGOs because of it's a very difficult environment to be in. You're serving communities, you've got targets, and like you said, you've got different donor requirements when it comes to how do you report your impact. And also, you have to ensure that you are at the grassroots level as well. So, a lot of NGOs do incredible work, but maybe at times they're not always able to capture what that impact looks like because of having a
Yeah.
lack of funding or resources. And so your NGOs are critical to ensure that at grassroots level, they are upskilling, they are providing work experience, they are training, they are reporting, and they would then work with the private sector and with government as well. And so then you've got young people themselves who have to share on these are the challenges that we face. This is what we want to see being made a bit easier for us. You've got trade unions who bring the dynamic of what do proper and fair working conditions look like. You've got industry associations that go to highlight from an industry perspective what are the skilling needs that we have based on what demand looks like for employment in the next few years across our member bodies. You've got social entrepreneurs, and we know, especially within South Africa, if we're just looking at it from, let's say, from an SMME perspective, SMEs are the backbone of our economy. And in
Mhm.
fact, the NDP estimates that, if I'm not mistaken, and I don't want to misquote, but about 80% of jobs created by 2030 will be driven by SMMEs. And so, how do we push that these SMMEs are not only for profit making, but that they've got a social enterprise element so that there is that aspect of service for communities as well? And
Mhm.
so, in essence, every partner plays an important role within the ecosystem. And I'd say that I mean, this example of youth unemployment in South Africa is a key one to show what works. I think that PYEI is a is a coordinating effort that works, where you've got government, NGOs, you've got Accenture involved, you've got Microsoft involved. How do we keep on creating more of these coordination mechanisms that stop us from working in silos?
Mhm.
But in essence, NGOs are absolutely key. I think the challenge with NGOs is the lack of resources. It is the lack of technical training to know how do you operate like a corporate in terms of reporting and financial management so that things are seamless and as efficient as possible. But there are a lot more NGO capacity building forums that are taking place. And I think there's more of a coordinated effort to look at how do we standardize reporting. I recently worked with Harambe on an ESG reporting tool, especially for measuring the especially as it pertains to youth employment initiatives that can be used across NGOs, the private sector, government. And our hope is that if this can be adapted and standardized, this makes it easier for NGOs to not have to comply to different reporting mechanisms based on who their funder is. So I hope that you are convinced in that answer about the important role that NGOs play.
No, no, definitely. I mean, I think sometimes it's just very good to be transparent about our biases. And for me, one of my struggles was actually finding my place within that, the intersection of, like you said, NGOs and then private sector and social entrepreneurship. So I'm really glad that you gave these examples. And I think it's another example of why conversations like this one here is so important, because maybe there's a lot happening that we're just not aware of, and that's also how these biases stick, right? It's that exactly what we said about the narratives about Africa. It's that when you share more about what's actually happening, then people start to think, okay, maybe my the picture I have in my head is not exactly reality. I mean, the documentaries that I've watched on the NGO sector are also just little clippings of the worst cases, and also because Africa is so dependent on NGOs, this is sort of the narrative that's been spinning in my head. But I'm actually I'm really happy to have those examples. It's really helpful. And I'm just wondering, from that, do you feel like, in this intersection between youth and employment specifically, is there something that excites you at the moment beyond this challenge that is youth unemployment? the
Mm.
challenge that is, finding the correct mechanisms and finding synergies within the ecosystem that you described. And I really like how you described that as an ecosystem, because if everybody's playing their role correctly, then there is flow. So I'm just wondering, we know the challenges. Is there something that's exciting for you at the moment within the space?
Yeah, definitely a lot. Definitely a lot. I'd say three things. One is definitely the coordination that is happening within the space. I think that in the past few years, there's been this urgent move to say, how do we stop competing and stop
Mm.
infighting and start coordinating with one another? How do we share best practice? I think that a lot of the times organizations, when they see what they're doing as working, hold on to that knowledge. But we need more organizations replicating models that work if they work. And so the coordination within the space has been incredible. From the ecosystem that I described earlier to also the involvement of development organizations like UNICEF, like the ILO. It's just been really incredible seeing what coordination in the space looks like. So, the second thing that really excites me is green jobs. It's such a buzzword, and I'm sure that within your experience in the Sustainability Institute, it's your bread and butter. And ultimately, green jobs just unlock so many new opportunities for young people across the globe, but especially for African youth. And we're finding a lot more studies in terms of which industries house green jobs, what are entry-level green jobs, how do young people access these jobs, and what does this employment pathway look like? And I think that's been really, really exciting to see. And a lot more work is actually coming up within that space, especially as we're seeing calls for decarbonization. We've seen JETP agreements. So there's so much that is happening, which will be very interesting to see within the next few years how many green jobs we can create at scale. I know that the ILO has got
Mhm.
predictions across various countries like South Africa, Indonesia. So I'm really excited about that work there.
Just a question about green jobs. What exactly are green jobs? Can you define that for
Oh,
somebody
my word.
outside of the bubble?
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's so important. There's actually a post that I have made about, well, that I'm planning to put out about green jobs. But ultimately, and there's so many different definitions, and because it's a buzzword, it's so important
Mhm.
that we can demystify what green jobs are. But I think in the simplest form, it is jobs that have a positive impact on the environment and climate as well. And so a lot of people immediately, when they think of green jobs, they think of solar, but it's not limited to solar. That's so vast in terms of what are the opportunities within the space. So in Accenture lingo, we look at environmentally positive jobs as being green jobs and noting that these are so vast across the context that we find ourselves in. But
Mhm.
stay tuned. I'm gonna post a green jobs demystified on LinkedIn, especially for young people, because I think how we go about it, sometimes we intellectualize concepts so much that we lose the very people that we're trying to serve.
Yes. No, thanks for that. So you
Awesome,
were
awesome.
going
And
on to
then
your
the
third one.
yes, the third exciting aspect for me has been gig jobs. Just looking at the fact that when we think a lot of employment, we think of traditional full-time employment, but the nature of employment is changing because the world of work has changed significantly. And so we're not limited to full-time or, fixed or full-time employment. We've got part-time, we've got internships, we've got learnerships, we've got, your fixed-term contractors, and we've now got the gig economy, which is allowing us to have the flexibility of, in essence, providing services where we sell our skills at a pace and a time that is most convenient to us. And we manage our own time across different employers or organizations. And I think that's been really exciting. And it's been amazing witnessing African youth embrace the gig economy, and I know that it's going to just continue to grow more and more And I cannot
Mhm.
wait to just see, especially young people, reap the benefits of just having the autonomy over what your career journey looks like based on the
Yeah.
skills that you have got. So yeah, it's a really exciting space to be in. We're in a crisis, but there are so many positive reflections out there about how we can overcome the unemployment crisis.
No, that's perfect. I'm smiling because I'm super excited about that last one, the gig economy. And I was actually going to ask you related to that, earlier on you quoted the National Development Plan, the NDP, and I'm just wondering, I was actually going to say, like, is there a shift from this, top down approach to jobs, specifically now in the time that we're living in with technology and just with the way that things are shifting? And perhaps traditional employment should also shift with the time. And I'm just really happy that you mentioned that anyway, because it addresses exactly that.
Mm.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
that's really great.
absolutely.
So, my last question before I have to let you go, I'm just wondering if you had a magic, I don't know, crystal ball or manifestation, whatever rocks your boat, where do you see yourself in 1 year from now? Where are you? What are you doing? What is your adapt story?
Mm. Definitely continuing to make an impact. Um, Still driving a lot of key conversations, but also critical implementation in terms of solutions for youth unemployment, still coordinating and sharing best practice across different countries, and hopefully looking at data, but also actual success stories of where different interventions have worked and how we can scale those up. So yeah, definitely looking at it from the impact lens would be important.
Yeah. No, that's really awesome. So thank you so much for I absolutely wish that we could extend this conversation because I have so many more questions for you just swimming in my head, especially about the backstory, your personal backstory and how that's pushed you into the time. But I know that you have to go now. So, yeah, I just absolutely appreciate your time, your energy, your contribution. And it's just stories like yours that inspire and also just keep, I think, refreshing the narrative. So, thanks so much for that. And yeah, it's been really great. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mali. I really appreciate the opportunity and thank you for your platform. I think we need more platforms like yours that are really sharing the African narrative, that are showing the power, the inspiration that comes from Africans across the globe. And my hope is that more people will listen to your podcast and hear that, geez, Africa is amazing. Geez, Africans are intellectuals, and just dispel any biases that they have. So thank you very much for having me.
Oh, I know that's awesome. I absolutely 100% agree with that. So maybe just to close off, where can people find you? Where should they follow you? Or is there an organization like the Africa Matters initiatives that you'd like to? You said you're going to post something up. Where are you going to post that up on?
Yes, sure. So you can stay connected with me on LinkedIn. I can search for Farai Ntuli on LinkedIn. Alternatively, on Instagram, my profile is Impact with Farai. On my Instagram, I do a lot of posting of job opportunities. I do a lot of sharing in key information. So the green jobs piece will be on both LinkedIn and on Instagram. And I also review CVs. So if you want your CV reviewed, so you can understand, geez, why do I keep on having rejections? I'd be very happy to review your CV. So yeah, definitely do follow and connect, and I'm happy to assist.
Oh, that's great. I will also load the links in the post. So yeah, absolutely enjoyed that. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Bali.